What's up, everybody? Welcome to another episode. George Jackson. Who is George Jackson? Every black person should know who he is since he died fighting for black liberation. George Jackson is the man that started the BGF, the Black Guerrilla Family. George Jackson was arrested in 1960 at the age of 18 years old for a gas station robbery in which $20 was taken. Him being young, not knowing any better, his family not knowing any better, let the lawyer convince them for him to take a deal for 5 years to life in prison for this gas station robbery in 1960. He took the deal. He went off to prison. While in prison, he began to get familiar with the works and the writings of Mao Zedong and Che Guevara and Marcus Garvey. He began to follow Malcolm X. He began to become very militant, George Jackson, a very young age. Remember, he was only 18 when he was arrested. George Jackson, you should look him up. You should Google him. He has a book called Soledad Brothers. This book is just a collection of his letters to his mother and his father, and then his brother Jonathan, and then some other people. He didn't know when he was writing these letters that it was going to materialize into a book. He was just writing his family from prison. But in these letters, and the letters are dated 1960, 1961, 1962. So in 1962, let's say, he's 20 years old now. And he's writing a letter to his mother. And you can see through his writings that he's becoming militant. He has blacks on the yard fighting back. He's telling blacks to be strong, not to turn the other cheek, and to become organized and structured and start attacking and going on the offense. Blacks begin to take heed. They're listening to Comrade George Jackson. This is his name. Comrade George Jackson is how he wanted to be referred to. He's teaching blacks how to make, you know what? They're in prison. He's coming up with workouts for blacks in prison. He's teaching blacks how to eat in prison. He has them reading and writing and studying. They're all looking up to him. George Jackson did 7 of his 10 years in the hole because the police kept hitting his cell, accusing him of being a shot caller for the BGF, of causing racial tension on the yard, so forth. They hated his guts for real. This is in the early 60s, and so they really didn't want a black man standing up, and he was before his time because he was extremely bright and extremely intelligent and extremely unforgiving. Read the letters. Read the book Soledad Brothers. It is a thing of a masterpiece. These letters are master writings coming from a 22, 23, 24, and then 25-year-old man. Extraordinary. And so he started the BGF. He started a group in prison, strong black men, and they called themselves the Black Guerrilla Family. This group began to spread throughout the California penal system, with George Jackson being the leader. he began to organize and structure ways to communicate with all of the prisons. Every time he went to the hole, he invented ways to communicate outside of the hole. In fact, most of the structure that you see in these other groups now, I'm going to say something controversial. The Southsiders included, the whites, they co-opted, they usurped the structure from the black guerrilla family. Yes, they already had some structure, but they took some of that structure that the black guerrilla family had and implemented it into their structure and made their structure better. They know it, though they may never admit it, just like many other things in America that we invent, we create, and others take credit for. Rock and roll. You would swear up and down white people invented it. It was black people. But they co-opted it, usurped it, and take all the credit. Music, dance, cooking, hell, peanut butter. Did you know that black people were here in America thousands of years before Christopher Columbus? He didn't discover America, but they canonize him and deify him and give him credit for discovering America. Did you know that Christopher Columbus had sex with 13 and 12-year-old boys and girls? He was a chomo. He was also a stealer of lives, all in the pursuit of wealth. America knows this, and yet they canonize him, put him on the biggest pedestal. And he trafficked 13 and 12-year-old girls and boys. Yes, he did. George Jackson started a lot of the structures that you see now in the prison system. And so, in 1969, George Jackson went to the hole once again. He's writing his family letters from the hole. While he's in the hole, or I should say, before he goes to the hole, he's writing his brother Jonathan Jackson. Jonathan Jackson is 12 years younger than George Jackson. So when George Jackson was about 25 in 1965, he began writing Jonathan Jackson, who's 12 years old. He begins to lace him with the same knowledge that he's lacing the BGF with. He begins to make Jonathan Jackson militant. You can see in the book entitled Blood in My Eye, written by George Jackson. Jonathan Jackson in this book is returning George Jackson's letters, his big brother. Jonathan Jackson in these letters is 14 years old and 15 years old and 16 years old. And these letters are a thing of beauty. You would never believe that this man is 14 and 15 years old. It is extraordinary. And in these letters, Jonathan Jackson says, hell will be their reward, referring to America for the trauma that they've caused black people. Hell will be their reward. George Jackson was no nonsense, very political, and unapologetically black. And he wanted revenge. And Jonathan Jackson is becoming the same way at 12, 13, 14, and 15 years old because he's listening to his big brother, George Jackson, who's constantly writing him letters and telling him to be a man and to be a strong black man, and that this is how you do it. And so, George Jackson goes to the hole in 1969. While he's in the hole, the whites and the blacks go to the yard. It's about 4 whites and 4 blacks. The one white guy starts attacking with a weapon one of the blacks. Why? I don't know. Because they know that George Jackson is in the building. They know about the BGF by this time. Everyone does in prison. They are growing, they're strong, they're structured, they're militant, and they're becoming very violent in every prison in California in the protection of black people. And yet, they still decided to try George Jackson and attack the black inmate with a weapon. There were other blacks on the yard, about 4 of them. The yard in the hole is very small, so it's about 4 whites and 4 blacks. The blacks jumped in. They had weapons as well. They all began to attack each other with weapons. The police, the gun tower, get down. The gun tower starts shooting. And the gun tower, he kills, or he eliminates, 3 blacks. There's 4 blacks on the yard. He eliminates, he unalives 3 blacks out of the 4. And not one white person was not only killed, wasn't even shot. And the white man attacked the black man first. This was clear. And he killed 3 blacks. Well, George Jackson was in the building when this happened. And he became irate. And he sent out word. We must respond, and we must respond fast. And so, the blacks caught a correctional officer just 2 or 3 days later, walking the tier. They had released George Jackson from the hole. He was one of them. A CO was unalived in retaliation for them killing, for them unaliving 3 black men. They say that George Jackson was one of the perpetrators. So they put him in the hole. I'm sure they beat him. They already hated his guts. And now he's accused of unaliving one of them. Now he's facing the death penalty. And at this time, and I believe even now, in California, if you already have a life sentence and you are convicted of a murder in prison, you automatically get the death penalty because you already have a life sentence and now you're convicted of a murder. So he was automatically facing the death penalty, was George Jackson. Jonathan Jackson, now being very militant and strong, even at the tender young age of 17, decided, I'm not going to allow. The fuck, man? Fuck. See me sitting right here? What the hell? Just stopped my whole little show, man. Let me get back to it. Jonathan Jackson, at the tender age of 17 years old, woke up August 7th, 1970, early in the morning. He armed himself to the teeth by himself. And he began to drive to the Marin County Courthouse, where his big brother, George Jackson, was due to be in court that day for the unaliving of the CO. It was George Jackson and 2 other brothers, Ruchell McGee and John Cluchette. They were all 3 accused of the unaliving of this correctional officer. And they called them the Soledad brothers. They are all three going to court this day. Jonathan Jackson decides my big brother isn't about to get the death penalty or do life in prison at all. I'm coming to get him. So Jonathan Jackson arms himself. He drives to the Marin County courthouse. He walks in the courthouse. His very words were, "Okay, gentlemen, I'm taking over now." And all hell broke loose. Part 2 of Comrade George Jackson, #1 BGF. Coming up. Stay tuned, people.